Most people believe wealth is earned 1 hour at a time. Wake up early. Work harder. Save more. Sacrifice more. It's the story we're taught from childhood, and it's the same story that keeps most people exactly where they started, 20 years later, wondering where the time went. But there is a small group of people who never accepted that story. They didn't get rich by working harder than everyone else. They got rich by refusing to fight the same battles everyone else was fighting. 25 centuries ago, a general named Sun Tzu wrote a book about war. But read closely, it isn't really about war at all. It's about something far more dangerous, the psychology of advantage. Sun Tzu understood that the ones who win are rarely the ones who fight hardest. They are the ones who position themselves so carefully that victory becomes inevitable before the first move is even made. The wealthy have been using this logic for centuries. Quietly. Without ever explaining it to the rest of us. While the average person is taught to trade time for money, the elite are taught, often without ever saying it out loud, to trade positioning for leverage, patience for power, and perception for control. This is not a script about tips and tricks. This is not another list of morning habits of millionaires. These are the strategic behaviors, the elite wealth habits, that quietly separate those who escape the system from those who spend their entire lives fighting inside it, never realizing there was another way to play the game. Here's the uncomfortable part. Most people will never learn these habits. Not because they're too complicated, but because nobody around them practices them. You cannot see a habit you were never shown. And the ones who do know it rarely explain it, because explaining it would mean giving away the advantage. By the end of this video, you will understand 7 of these habits. Not motivational advice. Not surface-level hustle culture. Real strategic behavior, drawn from Sun Tzu's oldest teachings and proven by history's wealthiest minds. But before we reach the first habit, you need to understand why most people never even get the chance to learn it, and the reason will probably make you angry. Sun Tzu wrote that the supreme skill is not winning 100 battles. It is winning without ever needing to fight one. Read that again, because it contradicts almost everything the average person has been taught about success. We are raised to believe that effort is the answer, that if we simply push harder than the person next to us, we will eventually break through. But Sun Tzu never measured victory in effort. He measured it in position. Look at the modern job market, and you will see millions of people fighting the same exhausting battle. Same degrees. Same applications. Same overcrowded industries, all competing for the same shrinking slice of opportunity. Nobody forced them into this battlefield. They walked into it because it was the only battlefield they were ever shown. Now consider the early career of Andrew Carnegie. He did not compete in the businesses everyone else was chasing. While competitors fought over finished steel products in an already saturated market, Carnegie positioned himself around the infrastructure beneath the entire industry, rail, transport, raw material supply chains that every competitor depended on, whether they wanted to admit it or not. He wasn't fighting harder. He was standing somewhere no one else had thought to stand. This is the first habit the wealthy rarely explain out loud. Before asking, "How do I win this?" they ask a more dangerous question: should I even be fighting this battle at all? Think about your own life for a moment. How much of your energy right now is spent competing in a crowded space, simply because it's the space everyone around you competes in? School taught us to raise our hand in the same room as everyone else. It never taught us to look for the empty room. But refusing a battle is not the same as avoiding effort, and this is where most people misunderstand Sun Tzu completely. Choosing your battlefield is itself the hardest work of all, because it requires something most people are never taught to develop. That skill is the subject of the next habit, and it has nothing to do with money at all. Long before the wealthy ever hold capital, they hold something far more dangerous, information the rest of the market hasn't priced in yet. Sun Tzu devoted an entire section of his teachings to spies, not as a footnote, but as the deciding factor in nearly every conflict. He believed that foreknowledge could not be gained from the gods, from spirits, or from calculation alone. It had to be gained from people who understood the terrain better than anyone else. This is the uncomfortable truth about wealth: by the time information reaches the average person, it has already been used by someone else to profit from it. Consider John D. Rockefeller in the earliest days of Standard Oil. Before he ever controlled the majority of refining capacity in America, he obsessively studied freight costs, rail schedules, and refinery inefficiencies that his competitors barely glanced at. He didn't win because he found oil faster. He won because he understood the hidden mechanics of the industry before his rivals even realized those mechanics mattered. The average person waits for information to become common knowledge, a news headline, a trending topic, a friend's tip, and by then, the advantage is already gone. The strategic mind does the opposite. They study the unglamorous middle layer of an industry, the supply chains, the incentives, the inefficiencies nobody bothers explaining because it isn't exciting. Here's a question worth sitting with: how much of what you know about money came from people who were also broke? Most financial habits are inherited, not researched. And inherited ignorance compounds just as powerfully as inherited wealth, only in the wrong direction. But owning information means nothing if no one trusts you enough to act on it. Which raises the next, more subtle habit, because knowledge without credibility is just a secret nobody believes. Sun Tzu taught that all warfare is based on deception, not dishonesty, but the careful management of what your opponent believes to be true. Long before a strategist moves an army, they shape perception. And long before the wealthy move capital, they shape trust. This is one of the least discussed habits of wealth, because it sounds uncomfortable. It sounds like image over substance. But look closer, and you'll see it's the opposite. Credibility is infrastructure. It is built deliberately, long before it's needed, so that when the moment for capital arrives, the door is already open. Consider Warren Buffett in his early years in Omaha. Long before Berkshire Hathaway became a symbol of financial mastery, Buffett spent years cultivating a reputation for discipline and honesty with a small circle of investors, writing them detailed, transparent letters when he had no obligation to impress anyone. He wasn't chasing capital. He was building the kind of trust that eventually made capital chase him. Compare that to the average person's relationship with credibility. Most people wait until they need something, a loan, a partnership, an opportunity, before they think about how they're perceived. By then, it's transactional. It reads as desperation, not strength. The strategic mind builds reputation as a long-term asset, deposited quietly over years, withdrawn only when it matters most. Ask yourself honestly, if an opportunity appeared tomorrow that required someone to trust you with real responsibility or real capital, is there evidence already sitting in the world that would make that trust easy to give? Or would you be starting from zero, trying to convince someone in real time? This is why the wealthy rarely announce their ambitions loudly. They let consistency speak first. But credibility alone cannot carry someone all the way. It must be reinforced by something Sun Tzu considered just as vital as trust itself: the strength of quiet allies working in your favor before you ever need them. Sun Tzu rarely won through sheer force. He won through networks, informants, allies, and terrain advantages secured long before the battle was visible to anyone else. Alliances, in his teaching, were not built in the moment of crisis. They were built quietly, in the calm before conflict, so they could be relied on without hesitation when the moment came. Compare this to how most people approach relationships. Networking, for the average person, happens reactively. A job is lost, and suddenly they're reaching out to old contacts they haven't spoken to in years. A business idea emerges, and suddenly they need a favor from someone they never invested in. This is not strategy. This is improvisation, dressed up as connection. Charlie Munger built his fortune partly through one of the most quietly powerful alliances in modern business history, his decades-long partnership with Buffett. But look at how that alliance was formed. It wasn't transactional. It wasn't built the week either of them needed something. It was built on years of shared thinking, mutual respect, and consistent presence, long before Berkshire Hathaway became what it is today. The strategic mind treats relationships as a form of positioning, not emotion. Not in a cold or manipulative sense, but with the understanding that the people around you today shape the opportunities available to you a decade from now. Every relationship is either compounding in your favor or quietly costing you optionality. Here's a question worth asking yourself: if you needed real support tomorrow, capital, an introduction, an opportunity, who would answer immediately, without hesitation? If the list is short, that isn't bad luck. That's a gap in strategic positioning that forms slowly, without anyone noticing. But alliances alone cannot protect you from the single force that quietly destroys more financial potential than any bad decision ever could, and that force is the subject of the next habit. Sun Tzu warned that no country has ever benefited from a prolonged war. But he also understood something deeper: that timing, used correctly, becomes a weapon far more powerful than force itself. The strategic mind does not rush. It waits for the moment when the smallest action produces the largest result. Most people are ruled by urgency. A bill is due, so a decision gets made in panic. An opportunity feels like it might disappear, so capital moves without proper positioning. This is not weakness, it's simply what happens when time feels like an enemy instead of a resource. And urgency, more than almost anything else, is what separates strategic wealth from desperate wealth. Jeff Bezos famously operated Amazon at a loss for years, reinvesting nearly everything back into infrastructure while investors demanded quarterly profits. He wasn't ignoring pressure. He was refusing to let short-term urgency dictate a long-term position. While competitors optimized for this quarter, Bezos was quietly building the compounding advantage that would define the next 2 decades. This is the part school never explains: patience is not passive. Strategic patience is an active decision to withhold action until the terrain favors you. It looks like inaction from the outside. From the inside, it is the most disciplined form of control available. Think about the financial decisions you've made under pressure, not the ones you planned, but the ones you were forced into by a deadline, a fear, or a feeling that time was running out. How many of them would have gone differently with 6 more months of patience? But patience without discipline becomes procrastination, and Sun Tzu never taught passivity. Which brings us to the habit that protects everything built so far: the discipline of never revealing your full position, even when strength is finally within reach. Sun Tzu's most quoted principle is also his most misunderstood: appear weak when you are strong, and strong when you are weak. Most people hear this and think of trickery. But at its core, it is about control, controlling what others assume about your position, so they never move against you with full force, and never extract more from you than they should. The average person does the opposite instinctively. They announce their raise. They post their new car. They tell coworkers about the job offer they're considering, hoping for leverage, and instead hand away the very advantage they were trying to create. Every piece of revealed strength becomes a data point someone else can use, against a negotiation, a friendship, or a business deal. Consider how privately most old wealth actually operates. The families and institutions that have preserved fortunes across generations are rarely the loudest in the room. Rockefeller himself lived with visible restraint even at the height of Standard Oil's dominance, understanding that visible excess invites scrutiny, competitors, and unnecessary conflict. Concealment wasn't shame. It was protection. This applies far beyond money. In a salary negotiation, revealing desperation for the job costs leverage before a number is even discussed. In business, revealing full resources before a deal closes invites a counterparty to push harder, knowing there's more room to extract. Strength shown too early stops being strength, it becomes a target. Ask yourself, in the last year, how many times did you reveal a plan, a win, or an ambition before it was actually secured, and did it help you, or did it simply invite friction you didn't need? This habit protects everything built in the previous 5 chapters. But protection alone doesn't create wealth. What turns these 6 habits into something transformational is the final, quiet mechanism that ties them all together, the one force that turns small decisions into decades of advantage. Sun Tzu never described victory as one decisive strike. He described it as the accumulation of small advantages, better ground, better timing, better information, compounding until the outcome was no longer in question. This is the final habit, and it is the one that makes the previous 6 actually matter, because without it, every other habit is just a collection of isolated smart moves instead of a system. Most people think wealth is built through one big decision, the right investment, the right business, the right break. But look closely at anyone who has sustained wealth across decades, and you'll find something different: hundreds of small, unremarkable decisions, repeated consistently, each one reinforcing the last. Naval Ravikant has spoken often about this exact idea, that specific knowledge, leverage, and judgment compound quietly over years, invisible in any single month, undeniable over a decade. No single decision he made looks dramatic in isolation. It's the stacking that creates the outcome, the same way Sun Tzu's small tactical advantages stacked into total command of the battlefield. This is where the 6 previous habits finally connect. Refusing the wrong battle preserves your energy for the right one. Owning information before assets tells you which small decisions matter. Controlling perception makes each decision easier to execute. Silent alliances multiply the effect of every move you make. Patience lets each decision mature instead of being cashed in too early. And concealment protects the compounding process from being disrupted by outside interference. None of these habits are exciting on their own. That's exactly why almost no one commits to them. People want a single dramatic turning point. Sun Tzu, and everyone who has quietly built wealth using his logic, understood that the turning point isn't a moment, it's a pattern, repeated until it becomes irreversible. 7 habits. None of them loud. None of them exciting enough to trend on social media. And that's exactly the point. The wealthy have never needed to explain these principles publicly, because the moment they become common knowledge, the advantage disappears. Sun Tzu understood this 25 centuries ago: the deepest strategy is the one your opponent never realizes is being used against them. But here's what matters more than any single habit. It's the identity shift underneath all 7 of them. Somewhere between refusing the wrong battles and compounding small decisions, something changes in how you see yourself. You stop being someone who reacts to circumstances and start being someone who positions for them. You stop fighting for scraps in crowded rooms and start looking for the empty ones nobody else has noticed yet. This is the real difference between the average person and the strategic one. It was never about working harder. It was never about finding one lucky break. It was about seeing the board differently, understanding that wealth, like war, is won long before the visible battle ever begins. You don't need permission to start thinking this way. You don't need capital, connections, or a head start. You need only to stop asking, how do I work harder inside this system, and start asking, which battles am I even fighting, and why? Sun Tzu never promised an easy path. He promised a smarter one. And smarter, applied consistently, is the only advantage that has ever truly compounded across generations. If this way of thinking resonated with you, the next step is simple: stay close, because the battlefield of wealth has far more terrain left to map, and most people will never see it coming.